Was that a body? I should have known something was off the moment I stepped into the building. The air was heavy with the kind of stale odour that clings to old wallpaper. But there was something else. Something that lingered just beneath the surface, barely detectable, yet foul enough to make my nose wrinkle. Old buildings always smell a bit, I reassured myself, dragging my suitcase down the dimly lit hallway. The landlord, Mr. Perkins, had warned me the place was a little run down, but the rent was dirt cheap for a college student like me. Besides, it was just a temporary solution until I could find something better. As I reached my new apartment, 4C, I caught a whiff of something unpleasant. It was sharp, rancid, like spoiled meat. My stomach churned, and I hurriedly unlocked the door, eager to escape whatever was festering in the hallway. The apartment itself was small but decent. The smell, thankfully, didn't seem to have made its way inside. I tossed my bags onto the faded couch and took a deep breath. It was quiet, eerily so. The kind of quiet that pressed against your eardrums, making you hyper-aware of every little sound. I spent the evening unpacking, trying to settle in, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. My mind kept drifting back to that smell in the hallway. I wondered if one of the neighbours had left out some trash or if something had died in the walls. The building was old after all. Anything could be rotting away behind the plaster. That night, I fell into a restless sleep. I was jarred awake by a loud thud from the apartment next door. I sat up, heart racing, and glanced at the clock. 2:13 a.m. Another thud, followed by a low, muffled sound, like someone crying or whispering through clenched teeth. My immediate thought was that someone was in trouble. I hurried to my front door and pressed my ear against it, listening intently. The noises were coming from the apartment directly next to mine, apartment 4B. It sounded like something heavy was being dragged across the floor. Maybe they're moving furniture, I thought, but who moves furniture in the middle of the night? The thuds grew louder, and I could have sworn I heard a faint voice pleading. My heart hammered in my chest as I debated whether to knock or call the police. I didn't want to overreact. It was late, I was tired, and maybe my imagination was playing tricks on me. But then came a sound that sent a cold shiver down my spine. A choking gasp, abruptly cut off. That was no trick of the mind. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm and professional as I explained what I'd heard, but my words felt jumbled, frantic. They assured me that someone would be sent over to check things out. The next few minutes felt like hours. I paced my apartment, listening for any more sounds, but everything had gone deathly silent. The silence was worse somehow. It felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. Finally, I heard a knock at the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was the police, 2 officers, a man and a woman. I quickly explained the situation, leading them to the door of apartment 4B. The door looked undisturbed, but the smell from the hallway seemed even stronger here, seeping out from the crack beneath it. The officers knocked several times, but there was no response. After a tense moment, they decided to enter. "Stay here," the female officer instructed, her voice firm but kind. I nodded, retreating to my own apartment, but keeping the door ajar. I watched as they pushed the door open and entered the darkened space beyond. The smell hit them immediately. I could see the male officer gag as he covered his nose with his sleeve. They vanished inside, their flashlights casting brief beams of light down the hall. Minutes passed, and I heard them moving around, talking quietly to each other, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then, there was a sudden commotion, a loud bang, followed by hurried footsteps. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to hear what was happening. A moment later, the officers emerged, their faces pale. The male officer was holding something, a tarp, I realized, stained with dark patches. I couldn't make out the shape beneath it, but my mind immediately jumped to the worst conclusion. "Was that a body?" I whispered to myself, horrified. The female officer approached me, her expression serious. "We're going to need to ask you some more questions. Did you see or hear anything else unusual tonight?" I shook my head, my thoughts racing. Just the noises, the thuds and someone gasping. The officers exchanged a look. "We'll need to speak with the landlord," the male officer said, glancing down the hallway. "Please stay in your apartment for now." I nodded numbly, closing the door as they left. My head was spinning, trying to piece together what I had just witnessed. The smell, the noises, the tarp. Had someone been killed next door? Sleep was impossible after that. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, jumping at every creak and groan the old building made. The smell had somehow found its way into my apartment, faint but unmistakable, like decay and something else, something metallic, like blood. The next morning, I confronted Mr. Perkins as he was checking his mail in the lobby. He looked flustered, his usually neat hair disheveled. "Mr. Perkins, what happened in 4B last night?" I demanded, my voice shaky. He blinked at me, clearly uncomfortable. "Oh, there was, some kind of accident, I think. The police said it wasn't anything serious." I stared at him in disbelief. "Not serious? They carried something out, a body, I think. And that smell..." Mr. Perkins held up his hands, trying to calm me down. "Look, I don't know all the details. The tenant in 4B, well, they've had some issues, but the police assured me everything was under control. Just give it some time and I'm sure it'll all blow over." His dismissive tone infuriated me, but there was nothing more I could do. I returned to my apartment, feeling more unsettled than ever. The day dragged on, and I couldn't focus on anything but the mystery of what had happened next door. That night, the noises started again. A loud thud, followed by something scraping across the floor. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and headed straight for apartment 4B. But when I reached the door, it was ajar. Cautiously, I pushed it open. The stench hit me like a wall, making my eyes water. The apartment was dark, save for the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through a dirty window. I called out, but no one answered. And then I saw it. A shape in the center of the room, covered by the same tarp I'd seen the officers carry out the night before. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly approached, dread pooling in my stomach. With trembling hands, I reached out and lifted the edge of the tarp. Nothing. The tarp fell away, revealing nothing but an empty, stained floor. I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. How could it be empty? I was sure there had been something, or someone beneath it. A cold draft brushed past me, and I froze. Behind me, the door slowly creaked shut on its own. My breath caught in my throat as I turned back toward the door. Standing there, in the dim light, was a figure. Its face was twisted in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror. Blood dripped from its open mouth, pooling on the floor beneath it. I stumbled back, tripping over the tarp and falling to the ground. The figure took a step toward me, its limbs jerking unnaturally, as if they were being pulled by invisible strings. "Help. Me," it whispered, its voice barely audible, yet it echoed in my mind. I scrambled to my feet and ran, bursting out of the apartment and slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop until I was safely locked inside my own apartment, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I never saw the figure again, but the noises didn't stop. Every night, I heard the thuds, the dragging, the gasps for breath. I moved out a week later, leaving behind everything I couldn't carry in one trip. But even now, in my new place, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, certain that I can still smell that awful, rotting stench. And sometimes, when the apartment is too quiet, I think I hear a faint thud coming from the room next door.